Now it's time for our next brilliant panel, which is going to be on inclusion and equality, leave no one behind to achieve the goals. And I'm delighted to introduce the moderator, Dr. Nikki Black, who's a board member, Institute of Human Rights and Business. Also introducing Akanksha Sharma, who's the head CSR and Sustainability at Sterlite Technologies Limited. Also bringing on board Monica Froehler, who is CEO at the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens, and Seth, who is Chief Executive at the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Now, as they're all coming on board, I want to tell you something briefly about Dr. Nikki Black. All right, so Dr. Nikki Black is a director at ICMM, and that's International Council on Mining and Metals. And prior to that, she was the group head of social performance at De Beers, and she sits on a number of advisory boards and panels. She's brilliant. She brings her A game and she's making a difference. So over to you, Nikki, and welcome everybody.
Paola, thank you so much for that introduction, and how inspiring were those prizes, or those prize winners in the last section. Thank you. And I'm delighted to welcome my panel. Shola has given a headline introduction, and I see we're still waiting for Cello to join us. But given we only have half an hour for this session now, I thought I'd hand over straight away to Monica to ask you to briefly introduce yourself and your organization, so that people joining us in this discussion can see quite what depth of experience is being brought to the panel.
Gladly. Thanks for the opportunity. It's my privilege and pleasure to represent the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens. My name is Monica Froehler and I'm the Chief Executive Officer. The center is founded by the former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and his close friend Heinz Fischer. He is the former President of the Republic of Austria. And out of all of the subject matters that Ban Ki-moon could have chosen as former Secretary General, he chose global citizenship as being the key to unlock much of the promises of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement. He will probably be remaining famous for these two landmark achievements. And I know we are here in a community that are all like-minded and aligned on the importance of the SDGs. But what he saw already way back in his times as Secretary General was women and youth need more space and more support to actually fight for the implementation of SDGs and the Paris Climate Agreement. So this is exactly what we do. We do this as Ban Ki-moon Center in many programs, and they are clustered into the pillar of mediation, advocacy, leadership, and education. And in a nutshell, it is from fellowships to scholarships to online classes that we produce. We are privileged to work with partners like RELX, the RELX Resource Center, for example. Everyone out there in the audience who is interested on getting detailed expertise on the SDGs should be very encouraged to check out the RELX Resource Center that has a fantastic composition of archives. So we are privileged to work with partners that are multipliers in their own right, like Global Citizen, the NGO, like RELX, like the Scouts, like the Junior Chamber International. And we are very much backing the various leadership roles that Ban Ki-moon and Heinz Fischer carry, and also the leadership roles of our board, and are reaching hundreds, if not thousands, of young, engaged, passionate and compassionate global citizens who are helping us in our endeavors to promote the SDGs.
Thank you, Monica. Wonderful. Akanksha, can I hand over to you to briefly introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. So firstly, thank you for inviting me here today. It's a sheer pleasure. I head sustainability and CSR for Sterlite Technologies, and we are one of world's leading data and network innovators. And working with this organization gives me an opportunity to bring transformation at the last mile. And when I say that, I essentially mean that creating impact with various communities across the world on through technology on SDGs essentially gives me a lot of proud and pleasure. So we essentially focus upon health, women empowerment, and that is why inclusion and equality, education, and also environment as part of our community initiatives all across. And while doing all of this, we keep the UN Sustainable Development Goals at the very center of it. And while I'm representing India private sector, the role of CSR is very different as it is in rest of the world, because in India, CSR is also defined by law. So all the companies need to mandatorily spend a certain portion of their profits on corporate social responsibility and sustainability activities as prescribed in the Companies Act, which really makes a huge difference in the way Indian private sector looks at the overall sustainable development goals and how they embrace it, with their usual business activities and goals. So I'm going to talk more about it in
That's great. Thank you. And Selo Hatang, thank you for joining us. Could you briefly introduce yourself and your organization?
Thank you very much, Nikki. The Selo Hatang from Nelson Mandela Foundation, CEO. I've been with the foundation now for close on 12 years, and I had the honor of working with Nelson Mandela for a period. And part of the work that we have is I'll just describe this in 3 parts. We do what we call dialogue work, where Madiba was a specialist of bringing people together. People who would see each other as enemies, you'd bring them together to try and find a solution to the problem that they have. And as part of our dialogue program, we also conduct this, what we call the Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture. The lecture has been addressed by people like Sirleaf Johnson, Thomas Piketty, and that's where I'll talk more about inequality in a moment when it comes to Thomas Piketty, Bill Gates, President Obama in 2018, marking the centenary of Madiba's birthday, Mary Robinson, and this year, on the 18th of July, we will have the United Nations Secretary General as the speaker, and he will be addressing this very question of inequality, how COVID has finally held the mirror so close to our faces about inequality. We also do memory work. Madiba bequeathed his private papers to the Nelson Mandela Foundation. We have letters that he wrote while he was in prison, the vision that he held for the South Africa and the world that he wanted to see, the dreams that he had about a more equal, more race-free South Africa, but certainly the world. And the third part of our work, we honored that the United Nations in 2009 declared Madiba's birthday, Nelson Mandela's birthday, on the 18th of July as an International Day for Humanitarian Work called Mandela Day. And we run it predominantly with the UN from South Africa, and we then ensure that on that day, everybody contributes towards building a more equal society that we want to enjoy. So that's briefly the work of the foundation.
Thank you. Fascinating. Monica, if I could open the discussion with a question to you, and invite you to reflect on the impacts of COVID-19 on gender equality and inclusion.
Thank you for the question. I believe that the role of gender in COVID needs special attention. Why? We have seen 2 of the SDGs particularly under stress. One of them was SDG 3 and the other one was SDG 4, the one on good health and well-being and the other one on quality education. We have seen these sectors under stress across the globe. And the key service people who are standing behind these sectors tendentially are women. We know that half of the global population is female, and we know that many women don't have the same rights or experience the same, I'd even call them necessities that men experience. Now with COVID, this kind of situation became even harsher. And if we look at the various sectors that we have all over the place, let's focus in or let's zoom in on, for example, education. In the case of education, we, under COVID, have been looking on top of the 260 million people that are out of school, kids that are out of school. We looked at 146 countries that locked down schools altogether. Now, definitely girls were harder hit by that, Many of them don't have the means to immediately go to online education or even have the means to be instructed at all. So the schooling system was down. So the brunt of the burden is carried definitely by the children, but in proportion between girls and boys, more by the girls, unfortunately, than by the boys. The teachers as well, many of them female, 3/4 of the world's teachers are female, too, were particularly challenged because our systems are construed in a way that they are not very flexible, and that adaptability within schooling systems is possible in highly technology-prone societies, but not in the ones that are challenged in the first place. So the big questions were, and still are, access to education, then the continuation of education and the quality of the education. And women, again, have a special role in that one. When we look to the health sector, again, it's easy to illustrate that women and gender equality was challenged very much. Something even mirror imaged in the equipment that is available. We have equipment that is tailor-made for men most of the time and not necessarily even for women in physiques necessarily. That's on the micro scale. On the macro scale, healthcare providers and social care providers are feminine. Again, here we have the majority of the roles are taken by ladies. And here as well, we have little resilience in the system and little chance for adaptability. So where does this lead us? Even I'd say in the maternal health and child health care sector during the crisis, the system was particularly challenged as the access couldn't be guaranteed. What does it mean? It means that societies that were better equipped to deal with the crisis tend to be societies that are more open-minded to a real gender equality on all sectors. And that pertains to the health sector, that pertains to the education sector as much as to the economic sector. Societies that were led by female leaders is another point that I might be able to dwell on later, tendentially did better because of certain circumstances that are systemic, I suppose, than male-dominated nations that had a my nation first kind of attitude with foregoing multilateralism. So I'll stop here, but I'll gladly elaborate on some of the points.
Thank you, Monica. Now we'd like to turn to Akanksha and then to Sello to get a sense of how these issues are playing out within the Indian context and then in South Africa. So to Akanksha, India is critical to the overall achievement of the goals. And in an Indian context, what progress against Goal 5 and Goal 10 is India making?
So thank you for this question, Nikki. And I think in India, it's a question because being a developing country, which is also caught up in the age-old concepts of patriarchy, particularly, we are a country which is, predominantly rural. And the mainstreaming and inclusion of women is still a goal which is far to be achieved in India. And when I say that, I also mean that, a mainstreaming from the economic lens is very, very important when it comes to gender equality in a country like India, because unless people have the access, which is a very basic access to be a part of this large economic activity, I live in a country where women have to seek permissions from their male household, owners or their brothers and fathers to step out. And in that scenario, getting access to women to contribute and generate income and stand on the 2 feet is something which is an aspiration. And having said that, in today's COVID scenario, which has starkly, made all the differences very evident, I think this has also raised greater concern on the gender issues, because as per the National Human Rights Commission and the Women Commission, a huge shift in the reports pertaining to domestic violence have been. This is a great concern for the entire country because, people are staying together. They do not have much access. The law order is on stress. Besides this, in addition, the healthcare sector, which I believe Monica aptly said that, it's predominantly women served sector. And in that scenario, also the larger economic factors are governed by, men. and women are more and more getting dependable on their, male counterparts. So there is completely gender inequality case. However, the government is coming up. What's really interesting to observe in India is the contribution of the private sector, because businesses are really coming up in a big way to contribute out of their corporate social responsibilities, hand in hand with the public sector, both in terms of the private healthcare or building resilience with the communities on all these sustainable development goals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the things, that how more innovative approaches can be developed on public-private partnerships, particularly in developing countries like India, to foster development which is more sustainable and inclusive of all.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And Sello, how is this playing out in the South African context? What progress is being made?
Thank you very much again, Nikki. I think in terms of gender equality and reducing inequality generally, it's been a struggle. And I think what Akanskia said applies truly here in terms of also the role of business, because what we have is that we have laws that compel businesses to enforce some kind of equality in their systems. So there must be greater recognition of women when it comes to your board. You have to have a greater number of Black people also who participate in the economy. So on the political front, we have since the dawn of democracy in 1994, government having the state rather playing out a role of saying there has to be greater representation of women. So we're looking at close to 50% of women in our parliament, for example. But that does not then have, also in terms of local sphere of government and the province. So however you then go to businesses, the picture is still really skewed towards men, predominantly white men that are still dominating that space. So our system still needs a lot of attention. But I want to go back to also what Monica said earlier on in terms of the role of COVID, because what COVID has done was to hold the mirror so close to our faces about what we had normalized. We had normalized gender-based violence, for example. Now there had been with the lockdown that we had in our country, you had the rise of gender-based violence to almost unprecedented levels. And it tells you that society had normalized some things that we should have really thought were abnormal. This also includes how we need to be playing a role in terms of ensuring that access to education becomes something that's hugely looked into. We have launched a project called Avangasali, and what it means in a local language, South African language, it means no one should be left behind when it comes to early childhood development. At the moment, our education system actually encourages the draw of the lottery, where the family you're born in, the color of your skin, the community where you come from still plays a huge role in terms of your success. Now with Avangasali, we're saying from the start, when a child is born, going back to what Mrs. Machel said earlier on, going back to you need to then have society making it possible for you to succeed. Never mind where you are born. And Avangasali is about registering these early childhood development centers, making sure that they are recognized. At the moment, early childhood development practitioners, for example, are not getting any relief from state relief because most of them are not registered. They are in informal settlements, etc. So there's still a long journey to go, but we are still fighting to ensure that these things are done.
Thank you, Sela. But before we turn back to the other panelists to actually ask all of you where you see the opportunities to achieve these goals are in the next 10 years, Sela, I'd like to ask you for your reflections, and also echoing a question from Cynthia in the chat function, asking about thoughts on how COVID-19 is disproportionately impacting the Black and Brown community, and as you say, has held a mirror up to those inequalities. Obviously, inclusion and equality are at the heart of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. We're still on a journey to achieve racial equality, certainly as has been highlighted with the events in the US. Could you describe some of the work the foundation is involved in around moving forward on these issues of racial equality and division?
Well, thanks again. I think for us, we have been on this journey as the Nelson Mandela Foundation from day one, since Madiba established the foundation. We are turning 21 this year, and recently we launched a project with the US, Atlantic Fellows for Racial Equity, which is based in South Africa, the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and in Columbia University with the University of Columbia. And what we're trying to do with that is to ensure that the connectedness of South Africa and other nations, particularly the US, from race, dealing with issues of racism, we need to continue to be fighting these battles. At the moment, as you can imagine, the battle in the US around Black Lives Matter, and it being predominantly with the security forces, the police, we have had incidents here where predominantly Black police officers have been abusing fellow Black citizens. And in fact, the recent statistics that have come out suggest that the police have over 3,000 cases of assault, for example, over 200 in the last year, predominantly Black men dying at the hands of the police. And these things are about unlearning. It was normal for the police to treat Black people like that under apartheid. Now it's a long journey of unlearning that we must go through. And we as a child, I was 14, for example, when a policeman just hit me with the back of his rifle. I passed out, and on waking up, he just kicked me my backside and said, "Keep running." He didn't care whether I died or not, because I'm not human. I'm not human enough. Now, it tells you that to unlearn that will take generations. And I'm hoping that processes that we're engaged with you, Nikki, today, will ensure that we continue to make noise about struggles that we continue to have, and reconciliation, issues of race-based inequality will continue to afflict countries like ours. I mean, when Thomas Piketty was here, he highlighted that about how our race-based inequality will be something that we're going to have to go through for a long while. And I'm hoping that it will still be with my children, that they won't have to go through what we went through.
Thank you, Sela. Thank you. Akanksha, if I could then ask you where you see the path forward being for the next 10 years to achieve these critical goals.
So, particularly in context to India or in developing countries, I believe the question is about have and have nots. And it is not just, things, even the basic and essential services like healthcare, education, water, sanitation. We do not have equitable access to all of these things across the country, and it's really unfortunate. So I believe that in the years to come, and you're talking about a 10 years time frame, I see a very innovative model of PPP needs to be fostered. I really believe that businesses who are the resource generators need to come hand in hand with the public sector and the governments to create a very inclusive world, where basic access is provided to everybody and no one is left behind. I also feel that, today when we talk about inequality, we need to really see it from different lenses. It is not just about gender or, economic inequalities. I think I live in a country where, there are very few people who are economically empowered, and a large portion of the country lives under the poverty line. And in that scenario, how mainstream avenues for income generation, for becoming even a part of that economic activity is a big question in itself. So I truly believe that, all the change agents of society need to work together, and more focus needs to be on innovation, on fostering new models of change and development.
Absolutely, Akanksha, thank you. And Monica, what do you see the path forward being?
The opportunities are multifold, and I can only motion what Sello and Akasha have said. Absolutely correct, that yes, we do need to continue to make noise of the struggles we have. I like that line a lot, Sello, that you mentioned. We do need to continue on that. I see 4 very specific opportunities. One lies in cooperation based on facts. Those governments that speak the truth, not only to their constituency, but to others, and are willing to communicate well, succeed better in the pandemic and beyond the pandemic better. And I'd say there is a direct correlation between multilateralism-oriented countries and doing well in the pandemic. That's my point number 1. And the component of activism right now, Black Lives Matter, Fridays for Future, it speaks the truth of realities and hence shouldn't be an underestimated force for policy change and even for governmental reorientation and reform. Second point, technology. I truly believe the opportunity with technology has been more than evident now in COVID and even heightened in COVID. There is a great, as Akasha said, there is this phenomenal disparity that we need to close. We need to close the digital gap. Women and the gender gap is there, and there's the northern-southern gap, unfortunately, and much more work needs to be done on that one. So while cooperation is the political mantra, technology is the means. The system needs to be definitely better prepared and better resilient, and particularly the sectors that I have mentioned before, SDG 3 and SDG 4, need to be more resilient and more adaptable to circumstances like these, but beyond. And I think the driver to all of this, and this is my last point, so political mantra means system, the driver of all of this should be compassion. We are in this together. We have one planet. This is planet A. We don't have a planet B. We have one plan, and this is the Sustainable Development Goals. We don't have a plan B. And unless we are compassionate towards one another and see that we have more in common than what divides us, then we will really leave no one behind.
Monica, thank you. And thank you so much to Akanksha and to Sello for a fantastic panel. I can't think of a better note to end on.